you for taking the time to join our today's sessions. It is all about the 2021 census. So before we start the sessions, I would like to have a land of thought acknowledgements that I live and work in the unceded homeland of the Musqueam, Squamish, and United Nations. And I encourage you to take a minute to acknowledge the land. That's where you are. And before we start the sessions, we just want to make sure that if you have any questions, feel free to post your question at the chat. We will try our best to respond to your questions through the interview. And at the end of the questions, if you have any questions, we are here to help as well. So I'm going to introduce today's presenter, my colleague, Darren Lezubski. He's on the line here. His camera is a little bit weird, and we never know what is about the technology. So, but I'm going to pass on the floor to him. He is our very experienced instructor, and I'm sure that he's going to share a lot of great resources about the 2021 census to us today. So, Darren, over to you.
Thank you, Desiree. So when Desiree is saying my camera is a little bit wonky, I think you'll see in a moment what she means by that. I'm not exactly sure why I'm upside down. This is making me dizzy. So I'm actually going to, I love to have my camera on when I present it because I feel it's more engaging, but unless someone knows how to change this, I'm going to turn my camera off for the presentation. So I have no idea why I'm upside down. So welcome everyone. I'm going to turn my camera off and I'm going to share my screen. I will also say, in the spirit of reconciliation with our First Nation, Métis, and Inuit brothers and sisters, I am joining you from Winnipeg, so Treaty 1 territory and home of the Métis Nation. So anyone could be so kind as to just let me know if you can see my screen right now. Is everyone able to see it? Yes? Yes? Okay. Yes. Wonderful, thank you. So we'll get going. As Desiree had said, we will have a quick presentation, and then hopefully at the time we'll give you a bit of an introduction to Statistics Canada's website, and then we'll ideally have some questions at time for some questions at the end. So we sort of want to engage you and hope to encourage you to ask questions. Today's focus is we're going to be talking a little bit about the census, the 2021 census. Many of you may or may not recognize, of course, that today was a census release day where data on languages have been released. And I'll talk a little bit more throughout the presentation, but the census is an extremely large undertaking. So not all of the data gets released at once. So it gets released in different parcels and different portions. And so we're going to talk a little bit, and we'll show you the release schedule and what's been released, what's coming next. But we just want to increase people's awareness and understanding of the census and how it can be used. We'll talk a little bit about the release plan. I'll give you a quick navigation. And as I said, hopefully I have some time for some questions. Just a quick background about Statistics Canada. So we are the National Statistical Agency. And our job is to collect and compile information and make that information available to Canadians from coast to coast to coast, and to make sure that that information is reliable and accurate. We have hundreds of different surveys going on at any one point in time. I'm going to focus today on the census, but if you have questions about other Statistics Canada data collection activities, please feel free to ask questions. We want this session to be as informative and as helpful to you as possible. So please feel free to post questions in the chat or ask questions at the end. And one of the reasons that we do these sessions, and we so very much appreciate being invited to do this, is because we are trying to increase the data literacy and the capacity for people to be able to use Statistics Canada's data, to be able to find it, to be able to understand it, and to be able to use it effectively and accurately. So I mean, I look forward to doing sessions like this, and I hope we sort of generate a lot of interest and a lot of questions for you, because that's really our job. Our job is to make sure the information that we have is used and used as effectively as possible. As I said, today's focus is going to be on the census per se, the 2021 census, as opposed to any other numerable surveys that StatScan does. And we'll try and provide a little bit of a description of what exactly the census is. We'll talk a little bit about how it's conducted, when it's conducted, what's included, and then we'll give you some examples of how the data can be used. So what is the census? Well, the census is, by definition, a complete enumeration of the entire population at a point in time. So this census, the 2021, was conducted in May. May 11th is the reference date for this year's census. I think you can all appreciate that this was a census that was conducted during the COVID pandemic. So there were a number of challenges, and we'll talk a little bit more about those when we talk about how the census is done and things of that nature. But this census was different in many respects. For example, we in the past had what's called early enumeration, where we would go up to northern communities and conduct in-person household surveys. They collect the data. That didn't happen in this case. We had to use a lot more online data collection and a lot of telephone follow-up. But Canadians delivered, and we had the highest participation rate. 98% of Canadians participated in the census. So now our obligation is to make sure we get that data out to people and people use it. So the census is as I've said before, it is the largest undertaking done by Statistics Canada. It's done every 5 years, just because of the magnitude and the cost and the amount of information that's collected. And it's one of the key sources for some of the most detailed information about the Canadian population. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the characteristics, or what we call variables, as we go through the presentation. But the census is the key data set from Statistics Canada perspective. And it's conducted, as I've said, every 5 years. Who exactly is included in the census? Well, the census is ideally targeted all Canadian citizens, whether they be born in Canada, whether they be landed immigrants. Our objective is to collect information from the entire population. And there are certain populations that are excluded. So Canadians living abroad are included, but people living in Canada who may be government officials or military officials or things of that nature would be excluded, as well as people who are visiting Canada at the time of the census who don't regularly live in Canada. Those people would be excluded. But for the most part, virtually everyone who has a usual place of residence in Canada, or people who are living outside Canada but are Canadian citizens, would be counted and included in part of the census, or what we call the census target population. And how is the census conducted? Well, as I said, we faced some real challenges with COVID. We tried to do as contactless a census as possible. We used online data collection more than we have in the past. In fact, this census reached a milestone. 84.1% of all the respondents completed their census online. So I believe, I have to double check to see if this is in fact the case, but I believe Canada is the first country in the world where we've had an online response rate to their census of more than 80%. So it's quite an interesting milestone. It was a challenge. There were not just COVID challenges, but wildfire challenges, travel restriction challenges, hiring challenges. All of those played into how difficult it was to conduct the census, but somehow we came through, and Canadians came through, and we're able to report one of the highest response rates of all time. So Next question is, so we've talked about what it is, why it's important, and now we need to talk about why it's important. And I've sort of alluded to, and we'll give you a couple of examples a little bit later, but the census, unlike a sample, so I won't turn this into a research methods class, but a census is, as I said, the definition is collecting information from everyone, whereas a sample means you collect information from just a small portion of the population. You do so oftentimes randomly selecting people so that you can generalize the results, but they don't necessarily mean that you collect as much detail or information from the entire population. And the census allows us to collect detailed information about the Canadian population at very small levels of geography, which is something that is crucially important for understanding how Canada and how communities are changing over time, understanding the composition of the population and how that's changing over time, and just as a sense of what the portrait of Canada is right now and how that might change over time. So the data is used for any number of purposes, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the key roles and considerations where census data is used. But that's a quick introduction to what the census is, who's included, why it's done, and what we do with the data. So as I said, you know, the key point that we like to drive home is particularly people who are looking for business information, but not even just people who are trying to understand their communities better, is that unlike survey data, census allows you to get detailed information for very small levels of geography, very small communities. And this is just a list of some of the characteristics that we collect. So you're able to understand population, or just how big your population is or how small your population is, how many dwellings there are. When we talk about terms like demographic profiles, we're basically talking about age structure. So people understand how many young people there are, how many seniors there are. Step back for a moment and think about the different challenges that communities where you have very young population as opposed to communities with a very senior or aging population. Think of the different policy and the different program challenges that you might be facing. One of the challenges that Statistics Canada has always had is trying to stay on top of the changing social mores and changing characteristics and the complexity that families and households often characterize themselves. We are trying to always be as accurate and as reliable in terms of how we're able to characterize and describe families. We talk about income and language. As I said, language was released today, as well as the census is one of the key sources for Indigenous population data. It's one of the most important sources for other socioeconomic characteristics like immigration status, period of immigration. We're able to understand how diverse Canada is, what the age structures are for those different populations, as well as looking at things like what's the educational attainment level, what's the educational attainment level of males as opposed to females, what's the educational attainment level compared for different communities, how many people are working. All of those factors, all of those characteristics, or what we often describe as variables, are the type of information that the census provides us access to. And when I teach workshops, I'm a course instructor here at Statistics Canada, and I always remind people that to be able to use data, you need to have some context associated with that information. So if I tell you, well, 17%, well, 17% doesn't help me unless you know when that data was collected and what area it's referring to, and then what characteristic I'm describing. So this is a way of sort of describing the idea that these are the type of variables or characteristics you can get from the census, and then increase people's awareness and understanding that you can get these variables, you can get these characteristics at a host of different geographical levels. So people may be familiar with national data or provincial level data, but there's also data for census divisions or census subdivisions. Census subdivisions are essentially most people generally think of as cities or towns and villages. You can get data for economic regions. These are census divisions that have been grouped together. You can get data for census tracts. And census tracts are what most people often think about as would be similar to neighborhoods. So some of Canada's largest cities, those census metropolitan areas, which is cities and their surrounding communities, they're also divided into smaller areas called census tracts. And so you're able to look not just at how the population is changing for Vancouver as a whole or Winnipeg as a whole, but how is the population changing for particular neighborhoods within that city? So those are the type of advantages and the type of data that we are able to get from the census, as well as population centers and things of that nature. So oftentimes smaller communities may not necessarily be large enough to be characterized as the cities themselves, but they're still large enough where it's helpful to have information about the characteristics. So if it's less than 1,000 people or has less than a certain population per density, the population per kilometer, there'll be areas called designated places or population centers. And one of the things I'm hoping we do today is we get you interested to try and learn more about how are some of these different geographical areas defined, and how might I be able to use these different geographical areas to help me sort of identify the type of data and the area I'm looking for. So oftentimes, and this will become a little bit more apparent when I show you Statistics Canada's website. When we do these presentations, we'll often have people tell us, well, you know, the StatsCan website is so intimidating. There's so much there. And I admit it is a plethora of information. There's a lot of information there, but one of the things we hope to do with these sessions is just sort of pique people's curiosity to learn a little bit more. And as you learn a little bit more, you'll start to recognize that you'll become more and more proficient. You become easier to find the information you're looking for. And before you know it, you're going to be a data whiz. You're going to be able to find that information you're looking for. You're going to be able to find it effectively, and you're going to be able to use it accurately. So that's sort of the objective of what we're trying to do here today with the discussion we're having. One thing I will say, just as to help clarify, is, as I said, the census is conducted every 5 years. Generally, there is a goal or an objective to try to keep the census questions consistent over time, so they allow for comparability. But the census also affords us the opportunity to help fill data gaps and to be more reflective of changing social realities. So, for example, the 2021 census is the first census where we've actually collected information not just on sex, you know, what was your sex at birth, but now we've asked questions on gender. So now we're in a position where we actually have some data to talk about how diverse Canada is with respect to people who are transgendered or things of that nature. So that's a change for the 2021 census. We've added additional questions on language to clarify training and things of that nature in terms of instructions that people use. We've added a question in 2021 about the number of people who are either current or previous members of the Canadian Armed Forces. We've also got a couple of questions that are particular to Indigenous population. There's a real data gap with respect to membership in Métis organizations. There's a data gap with respect to land claims, a number of people enrolled in land claims, Inuit land claims. So there are actually 4 that are specifically identified in terms of the Nunavut land claim, James Bay land claim, Labrador land claim, and others. So now we're able to fill some of that data gap there. We also have some additional questions with respect to how people commute to work and working arrangements. You know, the labor force part of the census is a really crucial tool because it allows us to get an understanding of labor force characteristics at small levels of geography that the labor force survey doesn't allow us to do. So the census is really useful in that regard. We're able to look at unemployment rates for very small communities or small neighborhoods. And then we have a question that, again, new for 2021, that is allowing us to, for the first time, be able to report housing affordability on Northern and First Nation communities. So those are some of the changes that were made with the content for the 2021 census. Now, I have had not only was my camera upside down, but we had some issues with getting the video to work. There was no audio, so today's been one of those days. So what we're going to do is we're going to send you a link to this video, and this is just a quick video, a number of different partners describing how they use census data. And we'll go into that in further detail. But I apologize, I don't think this video is going to work, or if it does work, I don't think the audio is going to work. So we will rectify that. We'll send you the video, and you can watch the video at your leisure. It's better than any television program, I promise. I'm smiling, that's a joke. But so that video did talk about how different organizations use census data. And that's one of the things we wanted to sort of highlight here right now, is just think about the different ways that governments use census data. So we have federal government, we have provincial governments, municipal governments, First Nations governments, how they use information from the census in terms of identifying voters, identifying policy initiatives in terms of, do we need to look at the child care policies? How large is the child population and things of that nature? So those are the type of issues that governments and pseudo-government bodies, think tanks use information from the census for. But we also have nonprofit organizations and businesses. We'll talk specifically and give you some very simple examples from a business perspective of how you can use the census. As I said, nonprofit groups use the census to identify policy issues or concerns. And at this point, I always like to remind everyone that people will often say to me, "Oh, the census, it's just data, and it's dry and it's intimidating." But I always remind people, think of it as a resource, as a tool, just like any other tools you would use to help build a business, for example, or to better understand your community. Well, the census and the data from the census is just another tool that you can use to your advantage. That's why it's so important. That's why I encourage people to be familiar with the census and know how to use it, know where to get information from, because it's so helpful to have that additional piece of information that can help you when you're trying to supplement the information that you normally get from friends, family, community members. This is a way to quantify some of the issues and the challenges. From a business perspective, it's a way to quantify things like your market and your audience. So those are just some of the ways that census data is used. Think about transportation planning or urban planning. My background is city planning. Think about how planners use data to identify growing neighborhoods, how much housing is going to be needed. All of those are sort of things that the census allows us to do, as well as look at languages and ethnic cultural diversity. As I've said, from a business perspective, and I will say, Kathleen Crow and the Aboriginal Liaison, the Indigenous Liaison Program was instrumental in helping us to start this discussion going here. I wanted to sort of remind people that this focus today is on the census, but we also have other presentations and other data sets that may be a little bit more specific to data and business data, business plans and things of that nature. So that's in addition to the information we're highlighting here. And we'd love to have the opportunity to present more and to give you a glimpse into some of that information that might help in terms of what we're identifying here. Product development. How do you know if there's a market for your product? You have an idea, you have a service, but how do you identify your market? How do you identify your target? How do you know whether your market is large enough to support your business idea? Do you know which communities you might be wanting to focus on? So those are some of the aspects of how you can use census data to your advantage as, again, a tool to help you understand better, not just the qualitative aspects, but the quantitative aspects. How big is my market? What's the potential? Here's just a very simple example here in terms of, I've alluded to the fact that there is additional information that can help you identify revenue targets and things of that nature. There's information on different geographical areas, target market characteristics, and things of that nature. So let's just quickly, and this is a very simple example to get you to think about it, but I want you to step back and say, okay, if I have a business idea, or if I'm trying to develop or encourage others to foster entrepreneurial initiative, or to get a community going that might want to start a nonprofit initiative, how might we be able to use the census? So let's just look at a very simple example here where how can we use a census data to just put some parameters, put some context behind the business that we might be thinking about. So we've got an example. This is hypothetical example of someone who wants to start a skincare business selling natural soaps in BC. So they're located in BC, but maybe they want to refine or try to fine tune where exactly could I locate my business? Where should I locate my business? Where might be my most opportune market and things of that nature. So how do you go about using census data to help you make those decisions? You could use your gut, you could go on hunches, but good business decisions are often based on good data. So using data to supplement that hunch or that intuition you have is always going to be beneficial. So for example, I will show you when we go to the website, one of the most common and one of the most useful tools that Statistics Canada has with respect to census data, and that is the Census Profile. Census Profile is not the only tool that you can use, but it's one of the best tools to get you started, particularly if you have some hesitation or a little intimidation of data and you see a data table like, oh my goodness. We're hopefully going to point you to how you can use that information and recognize, hey, this has value to me, and I'm going to go back and use it more. So we've got this business example, and Francesca is trying to think about, well, where should I locate it? Should I locate in Coquitlam? Should I locate it in Chilliwack? There might be other reasons to locate in one of these particular communities, but you can use data to try and refine that. In this case, she's tried to think about who her target audience is. So in this case, it's women of a certain age group. Again, I want you to step back and think about from your perspective. I want this to be as practical as possible for you. So think about from your business questions or from your efforts to try to understand your community, what type of questions would you have that you would try to use the census to help answer? In this case, we've got a very simple example here. And so she wants to compare those two. The first place would be to go to the census profiles, to look up information for Coquitlam and for Chilliwack. Census profiles in the past would give you information for one community. Now, with the 2021 census, you can show multiple communities, up to 5 communities in one table. So you'll be able to compare different communities at one glance by looking to see how they differ in terms of population size, how they differ in terms of income levels. All of that information is readily available by simply selecting a couple of additional variables in the profile. So you can add a geographical area, you can add up to 5 and allow you to compare them. You can add different variables. So as I've said, and we'll talk a little bit about what has been released and what is going to be released. One of the challenges, if I may, that people have is the profile has a lot of information. And if you're new to the census, as you get more proficient and as you become more experienced, you'll start to know where to go and you'll know what to look for. But at the beginning part, it's sometimes easier to narrow the information that's available, so you're not so overwhelmed with information. So you can go in and add or remove variables or characteristics, or you can narrow your search. In this case, we know, Francesca knows, that she's interested in females of a particular age group. So she's going to just select data by age and simplify her search. And so she's going to look to see, how does Coquitlam compare to Chilliwack? And again, this is a very simple example, but just based on the data alone, there appears to be at least a potential larger market in Coquitlam than in Chilliwack. So now she's got some data to sort of back up an argument for why she might want to locate in one or the other communities. Again, just a very simple example of how you can use the information. And as I said, though, this might lead her to say, aha, okay, I think I've got a hunch here. Now, there might be other variables you'd be interested in. You know, for her market, she might be interested in income. She might be interested in education level. Those are variables or characteristics that are also either released in the profile or will be released in the profile. And you could look at those as well. So even though there's a potential larger market in Coquitlam, you might find that the incomes are larger in one of the other communities. So this is how you have to delve into learning how to interpret the data and just get a sense of what the meaning from the data has. So that's a very quick example. I'm hoping during the Q&A, you might be able to think about and sort of pose some additional questions of what if I'm thinking about starting a garage, an automobile repair shop? What are some of the variables I might be interested in there? And is there information from the census that might help me? You know, as I've said, there is information on commuting. It's not out yet, but there's information that will be released in November that shows the number of people who commute and how they commute. Do they take the bus? Do they take their private vehicles? Right now, and as of today, August 17th, the language data is now out and available. So after this presentation, if I haven't put you to sleep, I'm hoping you'll be awake and go check the StatScan website. I'm smiling. That's a joke. Obviously, you can't see my camera because my camera's upside down. It's still bugging me why, but just a quick synopsis of what is available. So as I said, the census is an immense data set, and not all of it gets released at one time. So we've got population, we've got age and sex data that's out, we've got data on families and households, and Canadian military experience, as well as income that's out now. On September 21st, the Indigenous people's data will be released, the housing data will be released. So there's a whole host of additional information that's still to come out. And one of the things, and this can be a sort of an intimidating looking slide in terms of how much information is presented, but I'll try to sort of put this into a little bit bite-sized pieces when I give you a quick tour of StatScan website. And then I want to make sure we leave time for questions, but it's sometimes helpful to think about, okay, what data is available? How can I find it? What does it actually refer to? So we have the data, then we have reference and analytical documents. And reference documents are, I always try to tell people that they're not necessarily the most exciting reading in the world, but they're extremely helpful. They'll help you understand how concepts are defined. They'll help you understand what exactly we're referring to when we're talking about a different concept or a different measure, how long it's been asked on the census. So it's really useful because the effort and the time that you put into reading some of the reference documents is going to make you a more efficient data user. There's also videos that we are encouraging. We have data literacy videos that are quite helpful. They're oriented toward an audience who may be just learning about the census and the different concepts. We have analytical products. Analytical products are, as the name implies, these are not just data, but there's analysis associated with them. They talk about trends, they talk about key findings and things of that nature. So those can be really helpful to you. And then if you do want to learn more about how is the data structured geographically, there is a host of different documents and reference information, as well as different maps that will allow you to identify what levels of geography are available. If the data that I'm looking for isn't necessarily available for the small area I'm looking for, oftentimes you have to go up one level. And that's just the reality of data and data analysis sometimes. So you're not always going to be able to find the data at the smallest level you would like. And sometimes you just have to go up a slightly higher level and make some assumptions about that. So those are some of the issues with respect to working with data, but I always try to encourage people to delve into it, to learn more. The more you learn, the more you'll be able to take from the data. And there's also custom services. So if there's data that's publicly available, and we're focusing on free data that's available to everyone, but sometimes the data that's available doesn't necessarily meet your data needs, there are opportunities to pursue custom tables and custom geographies and things of that nature. So with that, I am going to close my presentation. I'm going to jump to the StatScan website. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to some of the key sort of areas I've just talked to, and then I'm going to make sure that we have time for questions. Unless, Desiree, are there any questions or chats that you feel we should answer at this point before we move on to the website navigation?
No, we haven't received any question yet, but feel free to send your questions on the chat.
No questions yet? Come on, folks. Come on, let's go. So, okay, well, hopefully we'll be able to generate some interest and some curiosity if we walk you through the website, and then you can make my day by asking a question or two in terms of how might I be able to use this information. So let me see if I can stop sharing my screen now and share the Statistics Canada's website. So may I ask, can everyone see the StatScan website? Is everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, wonderful, thank you. So as I said, I won't go into too much detail, but as you'll see here today in the daily is, as its name implies, Statistics Canada's daily newsletter. You'll see that today the focus is on the release of the language data from the census. So I encourage you to please take a look at that. One of the things I find, and we do these presentations, we'll often hear people say, well, I went to your website and I got lost. I went to your website and I wasn't sure what, how I found something. I found something, but I couldn't remember how I did it. One of the challenges is we do have an incredible amount of information on our website, and you can scroll through and see some of the social media links that we have, some of the daily releases and key highlight data points that we have, as well as information about how to access our data, how to access some of the training that we offer. If you're a participant lucky enough to be included in a StatScan survey, you can come here and verify that we are actually the legitimate data collector, so people can be put at ease that that this is real and not a scam. They can come and find information about how to respond to surveys, as well as information about StatScan's structure, our minister, our StatScan, Statistics Act, our roles and responsibilities and requirements and things of that nature. As well as one of the things we're doing now is we're trying to focus more on what we call data hubs. So we have different hubs that focus on particular data. We have information on COVID and the impact of COVID. We have information on gender and diversity. So Statistics Canada is trying to be as inclusive as possible with the information that we're providing, and to provide it in as much disaggregate form as possible to allow for gender-based analysis. We also have information, as I've said, today's focus is focusing on the census, but we have information on sustainable development goals and transportation and energy and things of that nature. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm sort of introducing people to StatScan website is to draw people's attention to these sort of tabs at the top of our page. I call them tabs. Tabs at the top of our page. And I'm going to focus on the census, obviously, because that's the focus of today's topic. But these tabs are often your gateway to quickly finding the information that StatScan. So if you are interested in a particular topic, one of the best ways is just get a sense of the type of different information by topics that we have. So you could look at subjects and it'll give you a list of the different 31 sort of characteristics. So if I'm interested in demographic data, if I'm interested in international trade. So this is a starting point that is often a good place for people to begin. If you're not quite sure what you're looking for, if you have a better sense of what you're looking for example, if someone has given you a data table number, you can go to the data tab and type in the data table number, and you'll be able to see the information. And you'll see here that there's almost 10,000 tables on Statistics Canada's website. So it is helpful to learn some skills to be able to help you to sort of narrow down your search, to be able to pick up very simple shortcuts that allow you to be a little bit more proficient. As I said, there's the analysis and the reference documents. So analysis, you could come here and see information about different analysis reports that have been done, as well as reference documents. And, you know, I'm a bit biased, but I'm encouraging people to become familiar with the reference information, become familiar with the census dictionary and the guide to the census. It'll give you an indication of why the questions are asked, you know, help you understand the different definitions for some of the variables, as well as if you want to know more about geography. And then we have information about the different, as I said, there's over 400 active surveys at Statistics Canada. So here you'd be able to look at information about all of those different surveys. And if you're a survey participant, we'll provide you information of how you can respond and things of that nature. I'm going to focus on the census in the few moments that we have. And I just want to draw your attention to, as I've said, what is often the best starting point for accessing Statistics Canada data is the census profile. So you'll see when I open the census page, there's the census data, census analysis, census reference, census topics, census geography, and census of agriculture. We're not going to talk about the census of agriculture, but the census of agriculture is also conducted every 5 years. If you go to the census data, and this is usually the starting point for most people to find information, you can also scroll down and look at information for previous censuses. The Census Learning Center is where you'll find different videos. And I hope you'll take the opportunity to take a look at the video we'll send you the link for, as well as other videos that talk about data literacy skills and how you could sort of increase that capacity to be able to use and understand data. But I want to draw your attention to things like the census profile. So if I click on the census data tab, it'll provide you with a list of the different data tables that are available. Profiles by regions, data tables. We have data visualization, so you can narrow your search. Maybe you're looking for just data visualizations or infographics and things of that nature. You can use this as a way to narrow your search and just focus on infographics that were released or have been released. And an infographic can be a very sort of entertaining way to introduce people to data, particularly people who are new to data, who may be feeling a bit intimidated. An infographic is a very quick, very visual way of highlighting key data points. And if for others who are more interested in actually delving into the data and the data tables, well, then oftentimes the census profile or the data tables are the best beginning source or best beginning point. So if I go to census profile, and as we showed, I can type in any community. I encourage you to think about a community here. I might be interested in Sparwood, BC, the district of Sparwood. And if I type in Sparwood and try and see If there's information for it, it'll tell me, well, there's several different SPAR routes. There's the district municipality in BC, there's the population center. So if I'm interested in the district municipality, I'll simply click on it and I will get the profile for that community. And this would be for any of the communities you're looking for. So again, we showed you earlier where you can add or remove communities. For example, I might be interested in comparing them to Fernie. I think that's how you spell Fernie. I might want to add Fernie. Oh, I think I spelled Fernie wrong. I might want to add Kelowna. And let's say the city of Kelowna. So I'm going to add the city of Kelowna. And now we've added and are allowed to directly compare. And I could go on for a couple more. I can add and remove different variables. If you see a variable that has a plus sign in front of it, you click on it, it'll give you the opportunity to add even more detail or remove detail. Maybe I don't want marital status. I can simply remove that and then click apply. And so these are, as I've said, this is the census profile. It's a great way to get an introduction to the type of data, the size of a population, the distribution of a population, and other characteristics that that would make up that population. And if this gives you what you want, but you want more detailed information, then you can go to what are called data tables. And those are tables that allow you to cross-tabulate different variables. So you're able to see how different variables relate to each other. So again, go back to the census and census data, but in this case, not census profile, census tables. Now click on tables, and it'll give you a list of all the different tables that are available. And so one of the real useful things is that you can look to see how different variables are related to each other. Household income status by other variables. So you can compare that to median household income by parents with children, parents without children, etc. So that is, oh dear, it's I think we're getting close to running out of time here. But I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to make sure we spend some time for questions. And I wanted to make sure that you feel comfortable coming to Statistics Canada's website, exploring the website, seeing what's there, and then recognizing that you can always get more information by looking at reference documents and things of that nature. One of the most important ones that I'll highlight is the Census Dictionary, which is the document that will describe how each variable is defined. So that tends to be one of the most useful documents for those who are learning the census, even those who are very familiar with the census, in terms of making sure you're using the information accurately and effectively. So with that, we have a few more minutes left. I am going to stop. Well, I'll open it up to questions there. Does anyone have any questions? Please feel free. No one has any questions? No one is wondering how my camera got upside down? Well, I hope that was helpful. I certainly hope that sort of piqued your curiosity. As I said, we do have another presentation that focuses on business-specific data. So if people think that might be of use, we'd be happy to arrange a presentation that focuses on that. But with that, I'm going to leave it at that and see if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, Elsie, do we let them go early?
Yeah, we could do that.
I've never had a class be disappointed if I let them out early before.
Well, thank you, Darren, and thank you, Desiree, for your time today. And we really appreciate what you had to share today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.